Hi, I'm Yvette Mansulich, and I'm back talking to you about photography, which is one of my favorite aspects of yearbook. I absolutely love taking photos. And I'm going to talk to you about how every picture tells a story. We're going to talk specifically about photo composition because you, as a photographer, need to make specific choices in order to tell stories from a variety of different angles and in a variety of different ways. So Ansel Adams is one of my particular favorite photographers, and he had this quote that really speaks to me. He said, "You don't take a photo, you make it." And that's really true. It's not about accidentally getting a great shot. It's about having a plan. And you are a visual storyteller on staff. You have to tell stories, and the best way to do so is with photos and captions that accompany those photos. So what's your plan as a photographer? Going into these uncertain times, you're going to have a plan because we don't know if we're going to be at school all year, if we're going to do remote, hybrid. We don't know exactly what's going to occur. So it's important to have a plan in capturing all of the important moments of the school year, both in school and outside of school. So it really starts with composition. And so what is composition? Here is your definition. Composition in photography refers to an arrangement of objects within a photograph. And so in this particular photograph, which was taken by my staff, you've got the runner who is in what we would call rule of thirds. And so he's not dab straight in the middle of the photo. He's actually in what would be considered the rule of thirds. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But this is a visually appealing photograph because of its composition, because where the focal point is in relationship to everything else that is in the frame of the photo. So in understanding photography, it is important that you understand exposure and how cameras work. Now, whether you're using a DSLR camera, a point and shoot camera, or you're using your phone, and I'm here to tell you, you're probably on the fly going to have to be taking photos on your particular phone. So hopefully you've got a good camera on that phone. But it's important to understand how cameras work and exposure. Exposure is all about achieving the correct amount of light in a photograph. And there are three functions on your camera that are going to work together to provide the correct exposure. And they are ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. You must understand these three important factors in order to be able to utilize your camera well to take great photos. So ISO refers to the camera's sensitivity to light. The higher the number, the less light you need. But the noisier and grainier the photo is going to look. So if you're taking photos outside, use about a 200 ISO. For daylight, if you're in low lighting circumstances, you need to up that ISO to 800. But no, if you go over 800, your photo is going to get noisier and grainier. Aperture is also really important, especially when you're taking portraits, because aperture is measured in f-stops, and aperture refers to how wide the lens is actually open. Every time you take a photo, the lens of the camera opens to let in the light. So, for example, in measuring f-stops, if a lens is wide open, that's usually an f2.8. And that means only a small portion of the photo is actually going to be in focus. That's fantastic for a portrait. When the lens is open only a small amount, like an f16, almost everything will be in focus in your photo. Now, the other aspect that you need to understand for exposure is shutter and shutter speed. Whereas aperture is measured in f-stops, shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second. And that has to do with how quickly the shutter is going to open or close. And that is really important because shutter speed will affect how you capture motion. So use a really fast shutter speed of about 1/500th of a second to capture motion. If the subject is not moving, you can use a slower shutter speed, like 1/60th of a second. If you want to be a great photographer, you have to understand how ISO, shutter speed, and aperture all affect each other, especially if you're shooting in manual mode. So what's the plan? You need to understand how much noise is going to be in the photo. If you're taking pictures outside, set your ISO. Sometimes you can set your ISO naturally to 200 and it stays there. I like to use program mode on a DSLR because you can set your ISO and then the rest is set for you. Think about depth of field. If you're doing portraits, you really want to use aperture. You can set your camera to A priority mode and then select the f-stop that you want to get your desired effect. I love A priority mode because it will naturally automatically set your shutter speed and your ISO for you. If you're taking pictures of sports, guys, you've got to actually put it in S priority mode. That is shutter speed, action, and what you want to do is make sure you set it up to capture motion with less blur. So, how do you capture motion? Shutter speed. I like to tell my students if they're not proficient with a camera, don't put it in auto mode, put it in S mode for sports mode, because that's going to give you a pretty fast shutter speed, which will allow you to capture things like this, right? You can see actually the droplets of the water as it comes down. I also want to point out that all these photos were taken by my staff members, the majority of them, and they were 13-year-olds taking great photos. You can do this. If you know how to use a camera, you can take great photos. So let's talk about the rules of composition, because there's something you need to know about. The first rule that I think is one of the most important is the rule of third. And that's when you actually move your focal point to one of the intersections of the tic-tac-toe square. So if you look at the tic-tac-toe square and you divide your viewfinder into 3 quadrants, you want to put your focal point in one of the 4 places where the lines intersect. This is pretty awesome way to take photos. You know, sometimes when you're first starting out with photography, you want people put their focal point in the center. That's not always the best choice to make. So I'm going to encourage you to move your focal point to the left or the right, to use the rule of thirds, to actually use your viewfinder and your guides to take great photos. So this is a really good example of when you're looking through your viewfinder and you put this grid on. We now have the focal point that is in the intersection of the tic-tac-toe lines. Here's a photo that we used on one of our opening spreads in our book. It was of this really golfer that was kind of stuck with his ball in the water. It's a fantastic photo. Put it in S mode in order to capture all the water in focus. Great shot. Uses rule of thirds, fantastic photo. Here's another example of using rule of thirds to capture athletes. Obviously, this was in sports mode so that she's in focus and everything else is in focus. Need a fast shutter speed in order to capture motion without blur. This is a photo that was taken on our 8th grade Washington, D.C. trip. This photo actually was up for Photo of the Year for NSPA. It did not win Photo of the Year. It was, I can't remember, I think it might have been 4th place. But it's a great photo. Our focal point are the students who are taking pictures of the Washington Monument. Number two rule of composition is center of interest, also known AKA as focal point. So your focal point is what you want somebody to look at in the photo. It is your dominant element in the photo, and that is where the viewer's eye is going to go. Also with focal point, you want to make sure that your backgrounds are not distracting, so the person who's looking at the photo knows exactly where to look. This is a great picture that shows focal point. This particular camera was put in macro mode in order to capture all the water in focus. Notice how the background is slightly blurred out. Great way to capture what goes on in an art class. Number 3. The third rule of composition is framing, and I absolutely love framing. Framing a photograph is when the objects are usually in the foreground of your photograph, but it actually, if you frame it, it gives this illusion of dimension. It's a really cool way to tell stories. Framing is pretty awesome. This is a picture in our wood shop. He was working on this project. It was a picture frame, and the photographer was smart enough to get down at a lower angle and actually shoot the photograph of the student through his own project. So his project is framing him. He is the focal point. Really clever device to tell stories. Here's another example of framing. This also incorporates the use of rule of thirds. Great photo of students outside during lunch, just being students. Notice the girl in the foreground is our focal point. She's in the rule of thirds. And also the tree trunk is framing her, which is a really, really cool dramatic effect. Number 4. The fourth rule of composition is taking photos from interesting angles. So you can take photos from above. This was taken from upstairs because we have multiple floors in our school. This was taken from what we would call bird's eye view. You can also take photos from worm's eye view when you actually get on the ground as a photographer and take photos up. When you take photos from worm's eye view, your focal point or your subject matter is going to look larger than life. It's pretty cool. You can also use canting. It's where you take your camera and you slightly skew it to the left or the right so it's not straight. Here's a great example of canting. This photo was taken during a science lab. Notice how she looks like she's standing at a strange angle, but it's actually the camera that was placed at this angle. It gives visual variety to the photo. It makes it pretty interesting and cool. Again, this photo was taken from upstairs, and so we got an opportunity to capture a student at his locker, and you can really see what student lockers look like from a really cool, interesting angle. This photo was taken outside during a photography scavenger hunt, and it was also, they took the photo from the worm's eye view. Again, it makes the focal point look larger than life. Number 5, the fifth rule of composition is pattern and repetition. Our brains like pattern, our brains like repetition. So when you incorporate that into photographs, you usually come up with a pretty cool photo. So if you notice, this particular photo was a red ribbon week, and the photographer stood on the opposite side of the fence in order to take a picture through the fence at our focal point where she was tying on the ribbons. This is another example of pattern and repetition. I love that this photo incorporates more than one of the rules of composition. Our focal point is in the rule of thirds. I love that it's black and white. Don't be afraid to take black and white photos. I would take them in color, and you can always color correct them in Photoshop. Number 6, leading lines and curves. This is the 6th rule, and what I love about leading lines and curves is that it actually directs the reader's attention to the center of interest or your focal point. It's a really cool way to draw attention to what's going on in a photo. This is a great example of using leading lines and curves. All the track athletes have to take out all of the equipment right before a track meet. This is kind of cool because you can actually see the line of this leads me to the focal point of this track student. Number 7. Number 7 is balance. And there are 2 types of balance. There's symmetry, when things are equal on each side, and there's asymmetry, when things are slightly off. I love to use balance as a rule of composition when taking photos. It's really pleasing to the eye. Take a look. You've got 2 people, you've got 3 people, but in each photo, we've created a form or balance, which really makes it a good photograph. This is another example of balance. We've got 2 students, and obviously they really turned up that flame during the science lab to make a really cool photo. This photo also was a finalist for NSPA's Photo of the Year. Here's another great photo where 2 girls are doing a science experiment in class, and they are actually framing the photo as well as creating symmetrical balance within the photo. Here's another example of framing and balance. This was taken of students in our wood shop. Another example of balance, you've got multiple students in the wood shop. It's just a great photo. Now, let's talk about some tips and tricks, okay? So I always tell my photographers that they need to get up close and personal. And if they're not close enough, making their subject matter slightly uncomfortable, that they're not close enough. Details really matter in photographs, guys. So I'm going to ask that you get up close when you're photographing your subject matter. If you've got a photo where you're not up close, you can always crop it. Up close, the closer in a photo you are, the better the composition. This is a fantastic photo. You want to take photos that capture emotions, and this was taken at one of our dances. You want to capture people in candid moments. Candid photos are much better than posed photos, ladies and gentlemen. This was an example when they were doing the water challenge, the ASL bucket challenge. And so our photographer went outside and took photos of our students participating in this ALS challenge. Great photo. We used it on a theme page. Again, the Photographer knew how to set the shutter speed in order to capture all the little droplets of water and make sure that our focal point is in focus. Let's talk about portraits. Now, portraits are posed photos, but there is a way to take great portraits. We like to call those environmental portraits, taking photos of people in their own environment. You want to make sure that your backgrounds are extremely pleasing. And the more candid the photo, the better. This particular photo was taken outside behind the school. I love that the photographer got down low, took it from worm's eye view to get a really cool shot of a student. Here's what not to do. I like to refer to this as the felony shot. Guys, please don't put people up against a wall. Don't put them up against lockers, okay? No one wants to look like they just got arrested, and that's the way these photos look in yearbooks. If you're taking a posed shot, please make sure you've got a really, really nice background or a background that is not going to distract from the photo. Whenever you're taking candid portraits of people, you really want to make sure you capture their eyes. I like the old adage, the eyes are the window to the soul. This is an awesome close-up photo. Again, cropping matters. You want to crop in close in order to really capture a moment of time. So let's kind of review with portraits. It's really good to use pattern as a rule of composition with portraits. Make sure your focal point is in focus. Capture motion by using a very fast shutter speed. Put it in sports mode, guys. Always make sure if you're doing environmental portraits that you're cropping in close, your focal point is in focus and your background is slightly out of focus. You can use that by setting your aperture, which is measured in f-stops. Here's some more tips. Guys, you want to tell the whole story. You are a visual journalist. You are telling stories of humans interacting with each other. And in order for someone to actually want to see these photos, they have to tell great stories. Relationships really matter. So you want to capture the relationship between a student and a teacher. You want to make sure you're avoiding distracting backgrounds, okay? Use aperture to blur out the background of your focal point. But you also want to keep it simple. You don't want to throw every single rule of composition into a photo because sometimes simplicity is the most beautiful. More tips and tricks. Guys, if you're taking photos of sports and you want to capture athletes, please include their feet. Don't cut off their body parts. Don't forget you also want to include the ball. You can't Photoshop a ball into a photo. That's not ethical. So please make sure you're paying attention to what's going on. Please avoid mergers. Look at the left-hand bottom corner. Okay, this particular guy does not look attractive at all. Do you want to look like that guy in the yearbook with like things sprouting out of your skull? I think not, okay? Be aware of your light. You usually want to shoot photos with a light behind you as a photographer, unless of course you want shadows in your photo. If you want shadows, then you will shoot directly into the light like the photo in the upper right-hand corner. It will create a silhouette. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are visual storytellers. You've got to use your camera to document the history of your year. I love this photo. This actually won NSPA's Photo of the Year for 2019 or 18. I can't remember which. But this was a great photo of students at our dance, and that's actually our assistant principal who was DJing the event. You want to capture every single moment. It's these moments that are going to help you tell the story of your year.